Good evening, this is the Oscar expert here with Brother Bro. The Oscars has released their rule changes for the next year in Oscars, and we have two big main pieces of news: change to the sound categories and a temporary rule change related to the coronavirus and streaming films. Start out with the sound categories. Sound mixing, sound editing, goodbye, now it's just best achievement in sound. We're going several decades back to the last time that there was just one sound category. In 1963, it seems, Best Sound Effects became a category. I see 2 nominees each year for like 4 years, and then it goes back to being one category. And then, in 1975, we have a Special Achievement Sound Effects Award, which just goes to one movie, which just wins it. This happens not every year, but like sometimes. In 1982, we see 3 nominees in this category for Best Sound Effects Editing. The next year, we see 2 nominees. The next year, we have 1 nominee, which is then, because there's only 1 nominee and it just wins, it is considered a Special Achievement Award. But eventually, this became a consistent 3 nominations, and then it was named from Best Sound Effects Editing to Best Sound Editing, and then it was named Best Sound Mixing and Best Sound Editing. Best Sound Editing was actually only 3 nominees until the year 2006 when they expanded it to 5. Since 2006, it's been 5 sound effects nominees and 5 sound mixing nominees. And now they have combined it back to 1. You know, after all this time trying to figure out what to call each category, we just go back into 1. It's a circle of life, as they say in The Lion King. Worth noting, first and foremost, that this decision was supported and even I heard requested by the sound branch. So the sound branch isn't like mad about this. I mean, maybe
that's kind of interesting that they're not mad about it. Maybe they just see it as more of like a united thing. Like why is it separate? They're not really sure. And it's also just become blurry as to which one is which because of things like Bohemian Rhapsody winning sound editing.
Especially Bohemian Rhapsody. I think that could even be like considered a point in which the Oscars were like, all right, guys, like, what do we do about this? Because...
And La La Land getting nominated for sound editing?
Yeah.
It really makes you say, what is sound editing? I mean, and then they show the clip for what La La Land's sound editing was like when they announced all the nominees, and they're just doing the car honking horns. I don't know if you remember that. It was weird.
So basically, sound editing and sound mixing are different. Different people are awarded for each thing. They are completely different stages in the process of sound. Sound editing is basically the Foley, the recording of sounds, the sculpting of sounds. The lightsabers in Star Wars, in the Vroom Vroom in Ford v Ferrari. And sound mixing is the guy in front of the computer with the levels.
You'd have like a track of all your sound like effects, and then you'd have a track of your music, and then you'd have a track of like this, and you're just like adjusting the levels on them, like where they fade in and out. Like when a character gets like flash bombed in like a war movie and it's like wow, and then like the music goes, that's like a little sound mixing, I guess. But again, it's always kind of ambiguous because they're sort of intertwined, right?
Yeah.
Like you can't really have one without the other. Even thinking about what the difference is gets you to think about sound in an interesting way. When you investigate the difference, you learn something about movie sound that you probably didn't know. So it's kind of interesting.
It's really difficult to like distinguish when you're watching the movie what's what, and B, because all voters vote on every category, right, for the wins. So they don't really know the difference, and you can't really blame people for not knowing the difference because the name doesn't suggest the difference.
I mean, if there's sound mixing and then there's sound editing, is there also sound recording? Dialogue recording?
Yeah, like there are still different aspects that go into each one, so it's always blurry. And even in like visual effects, there's a like compositing and character design. There's so many different things that go into that.
You can't like fractalize all these technical things.
They're not going to award less people. They're going to award like up to 6 names, I think it is. Yeah. And they will all get the award.
Yeah, which is great. And everyone's still happy. No one's getting less awards. It's an interesting way of like rethinking it. You know, it's the whole entire team that brings the sound together, and it's how the sound works holistically. You know, rather than thinking about, well, is this movie a great sound, but like, is it editing or is that just mixing? Like, now there's none of that. If the film has interesting or well done sound, it's what you get. Most viewers, the layman, is just watching the Oscars, not understanding what the difference is. So I guess it was probably mainly to appeal to that.
Yeah.
And if they didn't face any kind of backlash from sound people themselves, then there's no reason not to go ahead with it, I guess.
The BAFTAs have one category for Best Sound.
But, it kind of means that movies will have to work just a little harder for that record-breaking or even record-tying number of nominations, which right now is 14. It's hard to get from that 13 to that 14. Only 3 films have done it. La La Land was able to do it because it had sound editing and sound mixing. But All About Eve did it, and then had one sound category, which it won. And it was just sound recording at that time. Kind of weird to have like a category taken out. I almost want to fill it up with something else.
Well, there's been a lot of suggestions of how to fill it up, which I don't really know if I agree with any of them. You have to think of like how many people you're awarding Oscars. Like ensemble, when the SAGs give ensemble, they give each member of the ensemble a SAG award, but we're not going to give like everybody an Oscar because then everyone's an Academy Award winner.
I would be completely opposed to giving an entire ensemble Oscars, but I would not be opposed if they had a best casting category and they did it that way, which the BAFTAs just implemented.
Yeah.
Which they gave it to Joker, which was weird. Again, is casting the same as ensemble? And if you're awarding a casting director for the performances of the people they casted, does that make sense? I don't really know.
Awarding best casting to Joker is probably the mentality, Joaquin Phoenix was perfect casting to play the Joker. But also, that could have been Todd Phillips' decision. Like, we don't know. Some people are saying debut director and, first-time actor, which, again, that would just be giving a lot of Oscars to people who you can say are Academy Award winners.
Yeah, I don't like this debut thing, like, debut director, first-time actor thing. Why do we need to give, like, a special award to, like, people early in their career? I don't really understand that. And it's like a weird window where you have to, like, hit as, like, a breakout thing, and it's just weird. It's a cool award to think about. It's a cool award to be like, what would I give the best debut? Just giving, having an Oscar is supposed to mean something. So getting it for something like that is obviously less significant if you're an actor than you actually getting it for supporting or leading performance.
Best stunts, I feel like for that reason makes the most sense because it's a certain craft that's actually not honored like at all by the Academy.
If there was a stunt category, you'd give it to the stunt coordinator who's doing choreography and just figuring out how to execute everything, does it in a safe way, and makes it look really cool. Like, I think that makes sense a little bit. If people really want that, and there's enough support for it, I wouldn't be opposed to it.
But yeah, it will be interesting to see how the combination of the categories affects what is nominated.
Or think about a movie like Whiplash. So Whiplash won sound mixing, was not nominated for sound editing, but I think if they had a best sound category, Whiplash still would have been nominated. The movies that have music in them, who are normally sound mixing movies, I think would still be in there.
And in that sense, maybe the category would be more like the mixing. Like Les Mis is going to get in there. Walk the Line's going to get in there.
That's true.
Like,
but I mean, they haven't been very different in the past few years. So because you're like, oh, well, sound, that means music. And
yeah, the BAFTAs always do that. The BAFTAs will include like the music movie in their 5 usually.
But this year would have been in Ford v Ferrari or 19. I mean, who knows? Who really knows? It seems like they were probably like this.
Now, the other major rule change is that the Oscars are allowing streaming films to still compete, even if they don't initially come out in, Los Angeles for a week or whatever the qualifier normally is. It must appear within 60 days, however, on the Academy's streaming website. This is not going to change the Oscars in the sense that, like, Bad Education, which was intended for TV, gets nominated for anything.
This only applies to movies that were already booked to come out in theaters. So that includes like A Quiet Place 2 and Tenet, whatever had a slot. So if you're a movie that's seeking distribution at film festivals, then you do not count. They're going to have to adjust their rules according to how things develop and whether movies open back up in time. And ultimately, as far as coronavirus goes and the Oscars, this is clearly affecting it. We would have been making more prediction videos, but there's absolutely nothing else going on. Cannes isn't even happening right now. So there's just been nothing new to like talk about.
We don't know how much this could affect like which movies are coming out in 2020 and which aren't. Yeah, In the Heights was a big move. That moved like an entire year.
I think it all depends on if movie theaters actually fully open back up. Not just some. Some are opening around the country, but the only way a movie studio is going to put their films back in theaters is if they have the best shot at making the most money.
For a lot of movies, that's just going to mean moving to 2021, though. That's
exactly. It depends. If everything's open in October, and then maybe there's a way they can put everything in theaters, like they'll be comfortable doing it. Unless everything's like kind of wide open, I would expect a lot of stuff to get moved. And the only films I wouldn't expect this with are like things like Tenet, which is like, we're going to put Tenet in the theaters as soon as possible. And while we might not expect it to have a huge opening weekend return, we are going to expect it to have like legs. Like it's going to keep going from word of mouth hype. We're going to get people back in the theaters. That's what Tenet wants to do.
Well, here's the other part of that, though. Even if movie theaters open, they might implement social distancing rules where they have every other seat, so they can't actually sell out theaters, number one. Number two, people just might choose not to go to the theaters because they don't want to.
Thing.
A lot of people would still be afraid and won't want to go into crowded public spaces like that, which is obviously understandable. So even if they open up, there's still going to be the threat of not making the money that you could have.
And so for me at the Academy Awards, I have to think, does this mean that this award season is going to be like dominated by Netflix? Because what if you can still put movies in theaters or not? I mean, what if you can't at all? Then it's just going to be like things that come out on streaming. If you can put movies in theaters, even if they're not going to do so well, Netflix doesn't care. I mean, they didn't put Irishman in theaters because they thought it was going to make them tons of money. They did it because they wanted to increase the profile of their movie and qualify. Are streaming platforms going to reign during the season? Like, are they just going to be more resilient to the coronavirus? Like, that's kind of true. It could happen, but we have no idea how things are going to turn out. Like, if they're going to change in 2 months or if they're going to change, you know, how much they're going to change in 6 months.
Will some movies that weren't associated with streaming platforms, like, are they going to be purchased by streaming platforms when it wasn't intended to be that way?
There's also the fact that independent films that are vying for Oscars and want the best shot at getting seen want to go to festivals. What will happen with the festivals? The festivals take place in September and October. Will the festivals be taking place in those months? And that's like not that far away from now. That's the end of the summer. Not having the festivals be there, that could even affect whether a film's going to come out this year or next year. Because if you can't get out of the gate at TIFF, and that seems like your best odds for people seeing the movie and then getting an Oscar run, maybe people choose to move their film back.
It might mean that we get less teeny movies at the Oscars. Movies like The French Dispatch or Tenet don't need festivals to gather hype. Like, we know the directors. Those surprise indies that come up at Toronto, like, we just might not have those this year. Those might be waiting till next year's festivals. Festivals are definitely, like, wanting to happen in some capacity, and all of them are trying to figure out if we actually can't get together and have a physical festival by the end of the year, how will we do this? Because we want to do something. Are we going to incorporate like online to some extent? Maybe we'll screen like in certain cities. Maybe they'll invite people to basically just have big press screenings in certain cities. Like, I don't know what's going to happen. The other thing with the option of like online festivals is that like any of these high profile movies that would normally get released at festivals like Ammonite or Annette or fucking Mank, like none of these are gonna be part of like the online released movies. The movies that they'll show are most likely going to be movies that will benefit from getting this amount of exposure.
The whole dilemma that these festivals face is piracy. Like if you put your movie on the line for anybody to stream or even watch live, like you risk piracy. That's it. Things are gonna be different. The coronavirus is not just gonna disappear. It's not gonna go poof. We're going to have it in Oscar season, and we're going to have it at the Oscars. Like, there might not be people at the Oscars this year, but I think the Oscars will still happen. Because it'd be really weird to skip a year, even if everything has to come out on demand, which is like worst case scenario. I actually think that that's not really going to happen. There's going to be some form of theatrical release. Will the box office be able to like get itself back up to normal? I have no idea. That's the part, like I have no idea, but I think they will try. Like Tenet is going to come out this year at some point in theaters. But, like, will it be one of the only films that you have the option of seeing? But the theaters are trying really hard to get to reopen. They're already putting out guidelines for what kind of safety precautions they want to have standardized so that people feel safe in the movie theater. Movie theaters are also not going to die. They are getting federal funds and grants so that they can keep going. And small movie theaters might die, but things like AMC, like they're not going anywhere. They're losing lots of revenue, but it's a temporary thing. This is not the death of movie theaters. I think people can calm down about that.
Another option that might become available, which sort of gets into the whole Trolls World Tour thing, is that some movies might opt for both. Universal has suggested, after the success of Trolls, that they may plan on, like, if some theaters are open, allow those movies to appear in those theaters, but because of the disadvantages that theaters will face, you know, people not wanting to go, have them come out on streaming too, so people just have the option. Yeah. This might be the best case for movies themselves in the studios to make the most money. Theaters don't like this option. AMC and Regal have said that if you're going to do this, we actually are going to boycott you, and we're not going to release
any
these
kind
films
of
in
thing
theaters.
with eliminating the special window that theaters get for release. All the giant chains are like, they say, like, categorically opposed to. Like, it just, like, completely violates, like, you know, the deal they thought they had with these production companies. It's, like, offensive to them. So basically what happened is, like, the head of Universal said they want to release films on both platforms. He didn't make, like, a formal statement about it. He said, going forward, we will, you know, look at the option of releasing on both platforms, in theaters and at home. That might be the way that people choose to view movies. Like, they might have the choice. And I think that's a normal thought to have. Like, during these times, one way you can adapt is by putting a movie in theaters, but also offering it at home. AMC, like, kind of freaked out. And also Regal Theaters followed up and kind of did the same thing. And they said, like, well, we're just not going to show, like, any of your films. But Universal didn't say they're going to do this forever. Some people are interpreting it like Universal did a test run with Trolls, and now they're confident that every movie that comes out, they can just release wherever they want, on demand and in theaters, and they'll be happy to do it. But that's not really the case. It's not what Universal said, and I highly doubt that's going to happen.
No, and people are also saying that this implies that movies can do as well at home. In every sense, this is not a normal scenario, and if people weren't stuck at home, these movies might not be doing as well on demand.
Well, they absolutely wouldn't be doing as well on
Yeah,
demand.
this isn't like the death of the theater-going experience just because some movies might be doing well at this time on demand. And I definitely don't think that Universal is going to continue this move after COVID like goes away or whatever that is.
Yeah.
Do I think that AMC is making the right decision by being like against it? Like, they're obviously operating in their own interest, but we want the studios to feel confident that they can make money so that they can release their films so that we can get a competitive Oscar season. You know, that might be my selfish motive. I think a theatrical and streaming combination might be a very good idea.
If you're not confident you're going to make all your money back in the box office because people might not want to go to your theater, then why not offer the option for both? You know, are people going to choose to stay home over going to the theater? Or would the people who are staying home watching movies not have gone to the theater anyway? So it's really hard to tell. Like, there's not going to be any like solid data on how people actually are going to behave in this scenario.
As long as theaters aren't boycotting and it doesn't happen.
I think there's a little bit of a reason, you know, for theaters to be scared. Like, at home, studios can make 80% of the revenue from video on demand services. When they release in theaters, they get back, I think, about 50, around half. AMC's scared that like maybe they can't offer them as good of a deal.
The Trolls example, when we compare what it made in a certain window in the US and Canada to what Universal made in this window with the sequel, we can compare Trolls 1 and Trolls 2. It's kind of interesting. The studio made about as much money. They could be about equally as profitable. Maybe it depends on the movie. We don't know like which movies do well.
Yeah,
Universal's going to
matters.
continue to experiment, and The King of Staten Island, which is the Judd Apatow Pete Davidson movie, which sounds pretty good, sounds interesting to me, is planning on being their next movie that they release on demand.
Yeah, it's a whole thing of just guessing like consumer behavior, and people are behaving differently right now than they will in 6 months, and then after that 6 months they'll be behaving back to normal. Coronavirus has already had an impact on Oscar season in some small ways, but like how much will it have an impact on Oscar season? If the festivals don't run, streaming services might reign this season. Tenet might actually benefit because if it's the first movie to come out and get everybody back into the theaters and get excited about going to the movies, that's like a pretty nice story to tell.
But also Tenet's a big risk because that costs $200 million. Like, they're not going to play around with that shit. Like, they're not going to be like, we'll see. Like, with that kind of money.
They're not going to release Tenet if people are still afraid to go to the grocery store or go to a park. It's going to depend on just so many other factors. Again, I think people need to be weary of jumping to conclusions about this affecting the industry long term. The effects might be slight, but they're not going to change it drastically. Like, this is not the death of movie theaters.
And I don't think that Birds of Prey and The Invisible Man are getting nominated. Another smaller change that was made is there is an extra qualifier for Best Score, which is that a movie must have at least 60% original music composed for that film. Sequels and franchise films will have to have 80% original music.
For Star Wars, you can't really bank on recycling these melodic themes that you did in old films. I don't know how they determine that because it's ambiguous. Like, the themes kind of shift and everything.
Yeah.
So would the new Star Wars have been nominated with this rule in place?
It seems like maybe
I don't think
not.
so. The only films it's going to affect are movies like Star Wars.
And it also seems like that might be like kind of the reason they have this rule in. It almost seems like it's aimed at preventing John Williams from getting a nomination for every single Star Wars movie.
Yeah, 'cause
right?
it's annoying. In terms of the 60% rule, they already have a rule in place that says you can't dilute the score with other pieces of music that aren't original. This is a very subjective rule, and this hasn't changed. I don't think anything's really going to change from this because films that are less than 60% original score don't make it anyway. Like, this isn't gatekeeping anybody more. I think it's just to make it a little more specific about what they're looking for when they disqualify a score.
Like Waves would probably not qualify.
If they want to say it's 60% original music, they should just make that the rule so that we don't get disqualifications from movies like Arrival.
And that is it. You know, there are a lot of opinions and speculations to be had around these things. Thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing.
Make your best sound in the comments.